Hello and welcome to 3 Minute Gaming. I'm Nathan, and today I'm going to tell you if this game's worth their time and bandwidth. Today's game is Yakuza 3 Remastered. Often considered the black sheep of the series, this is an HDified version of the original PS3 game. Does it deserve its reputation? Let's find out. Yakuza 3 Remastered marks a turning point in the series for both Kiryu as a character as well as behind the scenes. It was the first game to not feature the crime rider from 1 and 2, as well as the first game on, at that time, next-gen systems. So what did they change, and did it work? Kiryu has finally left the Yakuza life, but for real this time, and is running an orphanage in Okinawa with Haruka. However, this peaceful life doesn't last long as the Toho clan chairman and Kiryu's friend, Daigo Dojima, is shot, as is the Okinawan patriarch Nakihara, and it looks like the shooter is Kiryu's long-dead father, Kazuma? What could be going on here? The first portions of the game are mostly running the orphanage and making friends in Okinawa, including their smaller Yakuza regiment. After that, you're tossed back to Kamurocho and the usual Tokyo-based Yakuza troubles, and that's when the plot really kicks in. Gameplay is your usual Yakuza fare, with two large zones of Okinawa and Kamurocho to play around in, with Okinawa being a little smaller, both a different aesthetic, and less combat encounters. Combat itself is infamous for how much enemies block and your combos feeling ineffective, though often dodging behind them negates that if the dodging works in this remaster. Leveling here is also the same as the original Yakuza games, not the Kiwami variants, with the XP you gain earning you points that you can then invest across 4 core stats that often come with associated skills, passive or otherwise. There's one big mini game here, the Hostess Maker, which I'll talk more on later, but it's basically like Beta Cabaret Club, and in addition to that, you have the usual Yakuza side stuff. Though it's worth mentioning because how analog sticks are different on modern controllers versus PlayStation 3, some of the games like Darts and Pool are a lot harder than they used to be. Speaking of PS3, that should also be mentioned. This isn't a Kiwami game where they remade an old one. This is a near straight port of a PS3 game with 60 FPS and some higher resolution graphics. They did add some quality of life stuff, like sub-story markers on the map, but aside from that, it feels like a game of that era. And honestly, I don't have a ton more to say about Yakuza 3. It's pretty bog standard Yakuza, but from the older PS3 era, with some frustrating new changes, but still maintaining the general level of quality across the board. So what did I like about Yakuza 3 Remastered? Well, once the murder mystery kicks in, it's actually quite engaging. There's a handful of clear players who could have done it, and trying to figure out who did it and why is a lot of fun. It's also a fairly important game story-wise with regards to the series as a whole. Additionally, I liked Okinawa for the most part. It's a much more unique location than any of the others in Yakuza, with a more laid-back, tropical, touristy attitude, and Kiryu in a Hawaiian shirt will never not be funny to me. And lastly, this game still has that addicting Yakuza loop and some pretty good sub-stories, as well as some new stuff like Revelations that play out some of the series' trademark goofy humor. When it comes to the bad, while the mystery's intriguing, the pacing around the story isn't great. I know some people like dinking around an orphanage, and I ain't gonna knock that, but the fact that the story doesn't truly kick in until you return to Kamurocho about a third of the way through makes those early sections really drag. Not to mention there's a part near the end of the game where a guy just sits you down and basically explains every plot twist in the game to you, which, like, come on, you couldn't find a way to do that organically? Additionally, the combat is frustrating. People call this game Blockuza 3 because enemies are always blocking, which, yeah, that sucks because your combos feel bad. My main annoyance was mostly how bosses just have an obscene amount of health and do a teensy amount of damage to you, which makes all their fights attrition slogs. Yakuza games are meant to feel empowering, and this feels kind of bland. And lastly, that main minigame that I mentioned, the Hostess Maker, is probably my least favorite one in the franchise. I like the concept, but it turns into a slow, monotonous grind pretty quick, and with the smaller minigames being a little whack, it makes a lot of the non-sub-story side content skippable. As you know, I rate games here on a 3-point scale. Must play, maybe consider, and don't bother. And I do think Yakuza 3 deserves its reputation as a bit of a mid-Yakuza experience. Its introduction is laboriously slow, the combat is unsatisfying until much later in the game, and they didn't add enough improvements from the PS3 version here to bring it anywhere close to others in the series. That being said, I don't think it's a bad game, and once that story kicks in, I did find it engaging. Not to mention, it's super duper important to play this one if you want to understand 4, 5, and 6. It is a good enough Yakuza game, and that's about all I can say about it. That's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching. If you played Yakuza 3, do you like it? Do you hate it? Please let me know in the comments. But regardless, go out there and give Yakuza 3 a look if you're playing through the series.